Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, or IFES, in this discussion series about democratic resilience in Europe. IFES assists electoral processes, broadly defined, across the world, and we have supported elections in European countries since the fall of the Iron Curtain. This is the 17th installment in our discussion series, and so far we've discussed issues from election administration to cybersecurity, disinformation, focusing on targeting women in politics, inclusion, abuse of state resources, and the role of the Russian government in European democracy and politics. If you missed any of our previous discussions, you can find recordings of them on our YouTube channel. My colleague is putting a link to that in the chat right now. I'm Magnus Öhman. I'm the IFES Senior Political Finance Advisor and also Director of the IFES Regional Europe Office in the Czech Republic, and we are hosting this discussion. This event is part of a larger USAID-funded program of democracy systems with the goal of supporting leadership that champions democratic practices and is made possible through the generous support of the American people. Last month, we had planned to hold a discussion about the democratic achievements of Ukraine in the last few years and the challenges that remain. That discussion was scheduled to be held on February the 24th, which ended up being the day when the Russian Federation invaded Ukraine. And so we postponed that discussion. And now we're back. And today we want to focus on disinformation and its connection to the war in Ukraine. Disinformation has become a key factor in this war, pushing entrenched narratives, primarily for the purposes of the Russian population, explaining why the Russian armed forces are carrying out a special military action or operation to liberate the Ukrainian people, while criminalizing the use of terms such as war and invasion. And we see how these narratives are also being picked up by other governments for their own political purposes, from Belarus to Serbia and beyond. The trajectory of this crisis and people's understanding of the threats involved will have a significant impact on peace and stability across Europe. How can tearing down the Russian government disinformation curtain assist in mobilizing anti-war sentiments and strengthening democratic resilience in Europe? To discuss these issues, we have with us prominent experts on political and electoral processes in Ukraine, Russia, and beyond. I will start by turning to Anya, Cumberland, recently appointed Regional Director for Europe and Eurasia at IFES. We will talk to Viktor Berezenko, who is the founder of the Institute of Cognitive Modeling. And we will talk to Iryna Shvetz, who's Senior Program Manager at the civil network OPORA, to get a perspective of Ukrainian civil society. And for a regional perspective, we will talk to Rasťo, who's the Executive Director of Memo 98, which is based in Slovakia. Then finally, we'll explore these issues together with Artyom, Liss, Director of Flying Fox Media. He's also a journalist and an editor. After that, we'll open for questions to our panelists and for discussion. If you have any questions, you can already now type those in using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So first, let me turn to Anya, Cumberland at IFES. And disinformation is a topic that we've talked about a lot in this discussion series, but why should we focus on disinformation in relation to the war in Ukraine?
Yes, thank you, Magnus, and hello, colleagues, and everybody who is joining us from around the world. This discussion is more important now than it has ever been. Why should we discuss disinformation when we talk about the war in Ukraine? Because it's essential. The current war in Ukraine is devastating, of course, on a number of levels. However, the way that has been perceived by and justified to Russians is especially a very dangerous threat to democracies in the region and in the world. Russia, as we know, has led a hybrid warfare campaign against democracies since early 2000s, particularly those within its traditional sphere of influence. This means that beyond employing classic tools such as propaganda, economic pressures, and of course, military interventions, in recent years, it has become a multi-pronged approach that also includes hybrid warfare tactics such as complex disinformation campaigns and cyber attacks. Therefore, we believe that information war is a key aspect and sadly a very powerful vehicle of this war. Kremlin strongly relies on the power of its propaganda machine and is confident in the power of these disinformation narratives. Many of us remember that only a few days after the 24 February invasion, Russian media accidentally published an announcement that Russia has successfully liberated Ukraine. They were so confident and prepared to start disseminating this news. In the current context, of course, Kremlin's propaganda machines frame today's developments in Ukraine as a special military operation designed to liberate a sovereign nation of Ukraine from neo-Nazis and their regime. This, of course, contradicts completely the true developments of events, a full-scale military invasion and war. Many soldiers, Russian soldiers, even they claim that they were not presented with the truth when going into battle, and of course say that many of them were going for military exercises. This is not a new approach for the Kremlin. Many of us have heard about their false flag operations or little green man in Crimea before. What is so painful for me, and probably for many of you who are part of this webinar, is a whole other level of disinformation war. And that is to watch interviews and reactions from those Ukrainians who have fled their homes, who are on camera pointing to destroyed schools, hospitals, homes, and posing a question directly into the cameras. Is this what Russian peace and liberation looks like? Many, of course, are crying during these interviews, or hold the children that are crying. And yet those looking at these images and interviews from the other side of the screen in Russia simply say that is fake news. Many of us know stories where Ukrainian family members call their relatives in Russia and share about their own experiences and losses during this war. 36 days. And on the other line, many hear again, this is fake news. This brings us to the whole other level of what can disinformation and propaganda do. According to various polls, around 50 to 60% of Russians embrace and justify these military actions in Ukraine, citing many familiar and repeated narratives about the propaganda, that Ukraine is full of Banderovцы or Nazis. This is why now, like never before, united democratic forces must act together to expose the lies and bring out the truth. Otherwise, as scary as this sounds, we must ask ourselves, where will these false narratives take the Russian army next? Thank you, Magnus.
Thank you very much, Anya. And I should mention, as we are discussing Ukraine and we are discussing information, it's very important that everyone can benefit from the information in this webinar. We do therefore have interpretation into Ukrainian. At the bottom of your screen, you will find a button so you can select either English or Ukrainian. Anya, hopefully the war will end soon and it will end in a positive way. But that's not the end of the story. At that point, what needs to be done next to fight disinformation? And I think you're muted, Anya. Okay, I think we have lost Anya for now. So let's continue with our discussion with her when she's back online. While we're waiting for that to happen, why don't I turn to Viktor Berezenko, founder of the Institute of Cognitive Modeling. Viktor, I want to ask, we're talking about a Russian government disinformation narrative, but what's actually in that? What are the main topics in the Russian disinformation narrative?
Thank you, Magnus, and thank you, everybody. I just want to say that the main narrative, it's not something new or something that was created like a month ago. It began many years ago, and the main narrative is sounds like Ukraine is the part of the Russian world. This is the main narrative that Russian propaganda tries to put to people's mind, to say them like Ukraine is a part of Russia, like Ukrainians is like the same as the Russian people. And this is the basis, and they try to build all propaganda on this basis. Second one, it sounds like Russia is an innocent victim. You know, it's like they saying like they didn't take anyone, and they just try to protect Russian-speaking people, or they try to protect something or someone. But it's a lie. It's that's not true, and they try to be like an innocent victim. You know, not as an aggressor, not as a country that attacks other countries, democratic countries, freedom, but as a victim. That's the lie also, and that is one of the main topics of Russian propaganda. Next one is Russians believe that if some of public protest, when people come to protest to say their opinion in the squares or anywhere, it's not for you know, like freedom or something about really from the heart. They believe that someone organized that process, and like Western countries are sponsored this process. And that's the one of the topics that we saw last week when mayor of Mariupol, he was free from the Russians, and he told that they didn't understand that people can just go out to the streets and freely say their own opinion. They think that somebody is organizing these meetings, but it's not true, because in Ukraine live free people who just want to say their own opinion. They're to have a freedom of speech and something like that. Also, we know the very popular narrative that this is not war in Ukraine. This is just like some special military operation. That's the lie, because this is war where people are dying, children are dying, women are dying, civilian people are dying. So this is the big topic of Russian propaganda, and a lot of instruments of Kremlin propaganda machine, they are using this topic. And unfortunately, a lot of people in Russia and Belarus are thinking that way. That's why we need to fight this propaganda, to fight this disinformation. And also, the one more topic is their special operation, like they name this war, is against some Nazis in Ukraine, you know. But right now it sounds really crazy and sounds ridiculous, because it's a lot of even Russian-speaking people in Ukraine that hate Putin right now, because they're saying that there is no any Nazis here in Ukraine, and they try to just kill civilians, kill women, kill children. And it's one of the main topics also in this Russian propaganda machine. They're using this messaging, and we need to fight it. We need to say people the truth. And this is one of the main topics of Russian propaganda narratives. Yes.
And I'm very interested then, Viktor, the channels and the methods of how this information battle is taking place. I've seen several references to the Telegram platform being key in this. Could you elaborate a little bit about the role of that platform in this information warfare, as it were?
Yes, of course. Right now, we have a number of audiences with the instruments that we can reach in this disinformation war. First of all, this is the internal audience. This is Ukrainians who live in Ukraine in this horror of war. Second one is the external audience. This is the people who live around the world who try to get some information about situation in Ukraine. And the third one is the audience. This is the citizens of Russia and Belarus who lives in these countries, and they have a lack of truth or truly information about the situation in Ukraine, about this war, because they really have a lack of instruments. So the Telegram became a very efficient instrument of reaching all audience because of the speed of reaching signal, because of it's simple. Everybody has Telegram on his iPhone or Android and can use this, but you need to check the, check all of these Telegram channels, verified channels, because it's a lot of also Russian, pro-Russian Telegram channels that try to put their lies, that try to put their disinformation. And in Ukraine, we have successful experience with the Telegram channel Ukraine Now, that has 1 million and 1.2 million subscribers from Ukraine, that provides information for the people on 7 languages in Polish, German, Italian, English, and other languages for any audience, and also in Russian for Russian-speaking audience, for people from Russia and Belarus. The target audience is the people from Russia and Belarus. They need to know the truth, and these channels and also our team is in cooperation with the Ministry of Digital Transformation are helping to make content for these channels and to deliver the messaging to the people from Russia and Belarus about the truth about the war in Ukraine, because they need to know the truth. They live in informational vacuum, and right now we have like Viber and Telegram. It's the only channels that we can deliver these messages to them. It's not so many instruments, so that's the problem.
Well, thank you very much, Viktor. We do in this series try to focus as much as possible on solutions to the many problems that we identify. So I want to ask you, how can a war on disinformation contribute to peace in Ukraine?
This is not a war just in one small direction. This is the war, a war on all fronts. And thousands of people around the world, together with Ukrainians, fight for peace in the information space every day. And we know this for sure because a large number of volunteers have joined the informational war, and we can see it in the social media and the TV and any media instruments. And millions of people just cannot stand aside when they see these lies from the Russians, when they see these murders of women, children, and every day, every Ukrainian and everyone continues to ask himself the questions like, what else can I do to bring the victory closer? So I believe that the uniting of people, the creating, these channels of communication from every account in Facebook, Telegram, anywhere, to do everything that we can do to deliver the truth to all of people that we can do, to Russian-speaking people all over the world in Russia and Belarus. So we can, we can destroy this vacuum we really can tell people the truth, because Russian propaganda is really strong and their disinformation is really strong. They built it for years. So we need to unite to fight against it and win it. And because this is informational war, this is war for liberation, for democracy, and war for truth. That's why we need to unite to win this war.
Thank you very much, Viktor Berezenko. And we now have Anya Cumberland back after some technical issues. So Anya, we were talking about when this war ends in a good way, that's not the end of the fight against disinformation. What needs to be done next?
Thank you, Magnus, and apologies for my technical difficulty. I did hear a good portion of what Viktor says, and I completely agree with him. We must all realize that it is critical that the democratic world continues to fight with Kremlin disinformation narratives and foreign interference, especially targeting those within the borders of Russia and Belarus. Of course, we need to continue the good fight for information integrity, as we see with Russians, where people choose to get their information and what they believe in makes a huge difference. This requires a very coordinated approach and thoughtful programming and ideas across all sectors, really working with journalists, working with civil society, academia, social media, and tech companies. And not just in debunking the narratives, but also showing the truth. We need to convey to Russians what do all these sanctions mean for their country and for their societies. We need to show the damage of the war. We need to tell them that there are a lot of investigations started by International Criminal Tribunal and so on. Media literacy is critical for empowering citizen awareness and democratic resilience. So these are just few examples of what else needs to be done. This work does not stop now.
Thank you very much, Anna. And a final question for you. What is IFES doing to support the efforts to counter disinformation?
Thank you, Magnus. Of course, as a big portion of our regional Europe work that is primarily funded by U.S. Agency for International Development is work for countering Kremlin's influence in the region. And a key mandate for that is support democratic processes. We have a very holistic approach to this work that includes information integrity programming, cybersecurity, anti-corruption, political finance, as well as civic education. That is very briefly, and I will now turn my time over to other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anya. And we turn then to Iryna Shvetz from OPORA. I want to go back to basically to our original question. From your perspective, what is the role of disinformation in the current situation in Ukraine?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Yeah, thank you for having me today with you. Hello, dear colleagues. So as for the role or the impact, I wouldn't say that there is a huge impact of disinformation on the Ukrainian citizens right now, because usually all those spaces designed by Russians are very bold and really too far from the reality, from our reality that we are living right now. There was also a big information and awareness raising campaign led by the Ukrainian government from the very first days of the war. And people were somehow taught to read the official news only, the news produced by our armed forces of Ukraine, the president, the government, also the ombudsman. There was also no information vacuum because Ukrainian authorities held press conferences and briefings on a regular basis. And the trust for the state communication channels grows like never before. Ukrainian TV channels got united as well, and they broadcast a news marathon. And I think that's one of the reasons why more than 90% of Ukrainians now believe that Ukraine is able to fight off Russian attack and the invasion. the poor quality of Russian fake news also adds up to this confidence of Ukrainian people. There are like obvious mistakes in the fake news designed by Russians, even with translating them from Russian to Ukrainian language. And all those fake news, at some point, they also become kind of memes disseminated by Ukrainian media outlets. So we have already some victories in combating Russian fake narratives, but there is still a room for fighting it on this information field.
Thank you very much. Well, as someone from civil society, what is the role, as you see it, of civil society in Ukraine in countering the Russian government interference in the democratic process within Ukraine and indeed beyond?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, like the role of the civil society is also very visible, and it used to be like that because, you know, the positive thing is that we know already what to do, because Russian propaganda and disinformation campaigns did not appear on February 21st when actually the military invasion started. We used to have monitoring campaigns launched by professional media associations. We also have a pretty good experience of combating propaganda on a governmental level. OPORA, my NGO, like we reported about pro-Russian bots to Facebook, other social media platforms during the election campaign, and we still do this kind of job. But there is still a challenge for the civil society on how to track disinformation abroad, because it's difficult for us to be proactive there. For instance, we may recall those cases with foreigners who somehow were told that they are not allowed to get on the evacuation trains on the first days of war, and dozens of international media outlets released this information. There were many reports of the same guy standing on the border crossing and keep saying that he's not allowed to cross the border actually. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the foreign embassies reacted, but at that point it was a bit too late already. However, as you also mentioned at the beginning, we were able to change the wording of this military operation, or the way international media called it, you know, this military conflict in Ukraine. And we put a lot of efforts, the journalistic, the media environment, also the civil society, and we managed to change the wording into military invasion, or the war actually. And also now I'm staying in my native city in Lviv. It is western part of Ukraine, and the media forum opened the exhibition in the very center of my city, and the main motto of it is "Call the war a war." So meaning that we should name the things that are happening with their real names, not just pretending or designing some new formulations, because we just do not want that the real war is happening.
Thank you. And I want to ask a question similar to what I asked Anya earlier. Let's hope that the war ends soon, that it ends in a positive way, and that Ukraine can go back to rebuilding and strengthening its democratic process. In that, what do you see as the main obstacles and priorities in ensuring that the Ukrainian democratic and electoral process is resilient against the disinformation that we are talking about?
There are several points. First of all, I think that we should really launch information campaigns on the state levels, and also with the help of the civil society at those countries where many Ukrainians are staying right now. It is expected that up to 8 million people, Ukrainians, will flee to the EU and other countries around the world. And in this sensitive situation, it is important to prevent ethnic hatred. We already experienced that in Poland. For instance, there was fake news saying that Ukrainians had better access to the healthcare services than Polish people did. And the Minister of Healthcare in Poland called it a disinformation campaign. Secondly, the civil society for sure needs to cooperate at the international level with many partners who can assist, to track the patterns, to rebuild those cases designed by Russians, and also to come up with our own strategy on how to counteract this. We should understand that Russian disinformation would be in place for many years, unless some drastic democratical changes will happen there. But, it's difficult to predict that right now. For now, 11 Russian-backed political parties have been suspended because of their links with the aggressor. There is an oppositional platform, Shari's party in the list, which have been operating for many years in Ukraine. But we don't know how many new affiliated political actors, both leaders, parties, some kind of institutions, will come to operate in Ukraine with their hidden missions. And of course, after the war, I will put it, after Ukraine wins the war, we will definitely need a strong information policy at the state level, at non-governmental level, not only to show those cases of Russian disinformation, but also show a positive progress, a positive information campaign about how the whole country is coming back to a normal and, what is more important, peaceful life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask you the question about what's the role of young people in Ukraine in all this, and what can others, outsiders, do to assist their work and organizations of such as OPORA?
Oh, actually, there are a lot of initiatives nowadays in Ukraine that young people can join. We call it Invisible Information Army. So everyone who has a computer can join this army. It's all about reporting fake news. It's all about reporting disinformation messages at social media platforms. And I think what was already mentioned, it's about spreading the word, spreading the truth to the international partners, to the international community, also even to relatives who are staying abroad right now.
Thank you very much, Iryna Shvetz from OPORA. And we now turn to Rasťo Kužel from Memo 98. And Rasťo, I'm very happy to be talking to you. You can help to me and others to make sense of all the difficult issues that we are addressing in this area. But one thing I've been trying to get my mind around is Kremlin losing control of the narrative? Are they losing the information war?
Well, thank you very much, Magnus, and also to colleagues. Let me actually start by thanking Iryna and all Ukrainians for their courage and bravery in defending not only their homeland, but the whole of Europe and our joint values from the Russian aggression. I think this war currently is not only the war about Ukraine, but it's really about the whole of Europe. And to your question, it does look like that. And I would just maybe look at what happened in 2008 in Georgia, and also 2014 when Russia illegally annexed Crimea. And we remember that both of these events were discussed in advance. I mean, there were carefully prepared narratives, and nothing like this was seen prior to this full-scale aggression. I mean, if there was something that they discussed primarily, the situation in Donbass and in these so-called independent entities, but there was no such a discussion about the full-scale invasion. Another important factor was the proactive sharing of the US intelligence, basically calling the potential false-flag operations prior to the war. Another signal that Putin may be actually even facing big problems of controlling the narrative inside Russia is actually the fact that media outlets such as Echo, TV Rain, or Novaya Gazeta basically are no longer able to operate. And this has been even further amplified by this banning of Facebook, Twitter, TikTok is not sort of fully operational. So yes, there are indications that that they are not controlling the narratives. And I would actually say that I would go as far as saying that the Kremlin has lost this information war, and it is not recoverable at this point. And I think we see these incredible contrasts. On one side, we see the very poor, and Iryna has already mentioned that, I mean, the very poor sort of narrative to justify the war, denazification of Ukraine with the president being a Jew, or demilitarization, and then of course we have these pictures, showing the damage basically caused by the Russian army. Of course, they do claim that this is Ukrainians shooting themselves, but who can actually really believe in this? So it indeed, I think, is clearly that on their side, they are really running a very poor information war. On the other side, and it has already been mentioned, I think it's just really incredible to see how well the Ukrainians are really fighting on this front. I mean, starting obviously with the president, I mean, who has become a real symbol of a true leader, like Churchill during this wartime, and he's really able to deliver. As well as other sort of events such as, I don't know, the heroes of the Snake Island, and so on and so forth. So I think clearly, I think we can really see that when it comes to the information war, the Ukraine is winning.
But is that, I mean, the restrictions that Kremlin is imposing on Russia itself, is that then the explanation for why so many Russians seem to be supporting the war? Is it simply that they don't have access to information?
Not only. I would say that, first of all, I think the support that the regime has is much based on mythology. The polls suggest that a majority of Russians actually support the war. But we have to remember that they are being, the type of war that they are being told Russia is fighting is something which is a very limited surgical special military operation, to prevent Ukraine from getting nuclear weapons, and that would actually present an existential threat to Russia, or prevent this neo-Nazi American-dominated regime from committing genocide against the ethnic Russians or Russian speakers, which is clearly nonsense. It's this part, and I think the second factor here is that I think it's striking that people in Russia believe these lies, even though they know that those who are telling them these lies are actually liars. But I think it's much more comfortable to sort of believe that these sort of lies than admitting that your government is actually fascist, and they're basically actually committing these crimes. So it's part of it is really this built cynicism of the Russian society, that it's actually better to act like we may know that this is happening, but it's probably more comfortable not to really admit that this is happening, if you know what I mean.
I do, and I want to ask, because this is, as you just mentioned in the beginning, this is not only a war with Ukraine and Russia in terms of disinformation, and I know you've done a lot of work in relation to Belarus. So I wanted to hear from you, if we look at the similarities and the differences between these two countries, Russia and Belarus, in terms of the narrative being provided to the people, and also how people have perceived these narratives. What will be your response?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting case, because we still remember the situation prior to the 2020 elections in Belarus, where basically Lukashenko was pursuing a very different narrative. I mean, he was basically accusing Russia of influencing the outcome of the polls. I mean, even demonstratively expelled the Russian soldiers from the Wagner group. And so that really changed after the elections. Obviously, it was the Kremlin that supported Lukashenko to stay in power. And so now he's in a difficult position, because I think clearly, we can say that that Belarus has been basically, now in hands of the Kremlin, and so they no longer call the shots. I think it's the Kremlin. At the same time, it's very interesting that we see some quite considerable resentment coming from even the Belarusian military. Apparently they refuse to join, the war against Ukrainians, and so it's much more difficult, I think, for the regime to frame the narrative, and I think this is what we have seen most recently in the Belarusian media that it's first of all they really try to avoid bringing some more sort of factual news, of course, from the front, and then they go about the typical sort of Second World War, framing of narratives. I mean, they do go about fascists in Ukraine. They speak about Bandera and these type of things. But I clearly feel that it's much more difficult for them to actually frame the narrative under this kind of situation.
Thank you very much. And we always try to end on a focus on solutions. What can be done then to further mobilize anti-war sentiments in the region, and perhaps in particular in Russia and in Belarus?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think clearly, this is something that we will have to do because I think we simply need to reach out to the Russians. I think Russia will remain to be a big neighbor in the region, and I think I mean, it has to be done in a very sort of clever way. I think some very good examples have already been done by the Ukrainians, with some of these projects, such as, for example, Papa, Believe Me, where they try to really concentrate on the relatives and basically tell them what is really happening. But it will take time. It will take much longer time until the economic sanctions hit. And this is, I think, where there could be some breaking point. Not really until that time, but then they will basically experience it. They will be forced to become more engaged because this will be happening to them more specifically. And also another interesting and important thing to mention is that when the Russian conscripts will return back from Ukraine, this will be another opportunity basically to hear first-hand stories of what has been happening. So I think I know that I ran out of time, and there are many things that really could be done. But I agree with Iryna and maybe others. I think we need to try to speak the truth to the Russians, to Belarusians, and we have to prepare that this is going to take a lot of time, and it's a long-term rather than a short-term project.
Thank you very much, Rasťo Kužel from MO98. And let's finally turn then to Artyom Liss, Director of Flying Fox Media, journalist, editor. So Rasťo just ended by talking about our approach in relation to different audiences. And from your perspective, Artyom, should there be a difference, and what should be the difference of how to fight disinformation for the different audiences? So we're talking about Russians within Russia, we talk about Russians abroad, Ukrainians, the rest of the world. What's your take on this?
Well, I think it's one of those cases where there is no one answer or one size that fits all. If you think about people outside of the immediate region, if you think about people outside Russia and Ukraine, for example, people here in Britain, then it's inevitable that over time they will begin to lose interest in the events in Ukraine and in the war. If you look at the front pages of the British newspapers today, for instance, then you will see that already Ukraine is not covering the entire front page. It's sort of moving back into the other parts of the newspapers. And that's only natural, right? There's been some academic research which shows that no news story can sustain itself in this world for more than 10 weeks. And I think we're getting quite close to the story sort of to the attention of the British public and wider the Western public exhausting itself as far as this war is concerned. So how do you maintain the interest in this war? Well, I think journalistically, I would, as an editor, I would now look for things which change the narrative, the things which change what is happening in terms of the perception of the population, right? You cannot continue telling the story of shellings. You know, these stories are all horrible, and these are stories which need to be told. But if your objective is to maintain an interest in the story, to maintain engagement with the story for the Western public, then you need to show them that the story is somehow changing. You need to find ways to sort of introduce those pivotal moments that, you know, there was this, now there's that. So that's one. If you think about the Russians, if you think about how to talk to them about the war, well, I think that is the $64,000 question, or the $64 million question, or whatever. I don't think that anybody has an answer to this, because the way in which the Russians perceive this war is not at all rational. There's nothing rational about it in the slightest. One of our panelists here has already spoken about the cases where the Russians get telephone calls from their children who have been taken prisoner in Ukraine, and they do not believe a word that they hear from those children. I myself grew up in Kharkiv in Ukraine. I have a relative in Moscow, and when I showed her pictures, videos of what Kharkiv currently looks like after having been bombed by the Russians to smithereens, her answer was, this is all photoshopped. So there is nothing rational about the way in which they perceive this war. And I've seen quite a lot of comparisons where people say, look, you need to treat them as if you are dealing with somebody who is in a totalitarian sect. And if you want to change their minds, you cannot approach them in the same manner in which perhaps you would approach somebody who can just be convinced that they had their own view. You have to approach them with a psychological sort of methodology, which is very often used to help people stop gambling, or to help people stop drinking, or to take people out of a sect. Finally, as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, I think they have been incredibly resilient against the Russian disinformation, certainly more so in the last few weeks, and that is to a large extent something that the Ukrainian government achieved, but also something that the Ukrainian civil society achieved. And that is a really, really strong thing. Now, my questions with this are two. One is about the long game. So how long can you maintain this resilience? This resilience is driven, I think, to a large extent by the state of shock that the country is living through, and by the state of stress that the country is experiencing. What happens a year from now, and how do you maintain this resilience for more than a few weeks or months? I do not know. And then the other question, which sort of worries me slightly as far as Ukraine is concerned, is that, look, there's an old sort of platitude almost that in any war, truth is the first casualty. And I think there's no secret that the Ukrainian government, quite rightly, is running its own information campaign, as it should. The risk, however, I think, is that people who support Ukraine, that is to say, every person with a brain and a heart, begin to believe this information campaign uncritically. And over time, I fear that there is a risk that Ukrainian journalists will maybe somewhat lose the ability to critically assess what their government is telling them. I really wouldn't want for this to happen. And I'm not saying that this is what is happening, but some of the stories which I see coming out of Ukraine, based on the official reports coming from the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, or based on the official reports coming from the government, they, in an ideal world, they would benefit from a second source. They would benefit from being checked. They would benefit from a critical approach. I think for a lot of the journalists in Ukraine, and also in the countries which support Ukraine, there's an element of how can I be critical of a government, of a nation, broader of a nation, which is suffering so much? Is it even right, ethically, to be questioning what that government or that nation is telling us? There's no simple answer, right? In the past, maybe 10 years, 15 years ago, I used to say to my colleagues, and that's a conversation which we had in the BBC all the time, we used to say that we are journalists first and foremost, and nationals of our countries, whichever that country may be, you know, Britain, Ukraine, Iraq, Lebanon, second. But loyalty to journalism comes above loyalty to your country. That's what we used to say quite a few years ago. Now, does that still hold in today's world? Does that still hold in a world where information is everywhere, in a world where the unthinkable has happened? I don't know. That's a really long philosophical debate.
Thank you, Artyom. You've covered a lot of very important issues here. So I'll simply, I guess, round off again with focusing on solutions. What happens longer term, not just to Ukraine, but to the world that's been hit by this tsunami of disinformation, and how can we solve the problems that brings with it?
Well, the first thing I would say is something that I'm sure every single person on this call already knows. And it's that debunking disinformation by just saying, hello, this is not true. Hello, this is not true. That doesn't really work, because that's not how people, making sure that there is enough of independent journalism in whatever country you look at that can produce content that is trustworthy and that is accurate. So that's point number one. Point number two, I think the idea of truth itself. This idea of truth itself, we have lived in a sort of postmodernist world where truth does not exist for years and years now. And there's very little trust in the media. There's been always very little trust in facts, increasingly so over the past few years. So I think by showing our workings, you know, when you're doing a mathematics test at school and your teacher says to you, well, okay, the answer is 17, but how did you actually get to the answer being 17? Show your workings. So by showing our workings and showing how the responsible media operates, and showing that we are not there to obfuscate, we are not there to do propaganda, we are there to, you know, say what we think the truth is, and this is how we approach our work. That's one of the key things we can do. And luckily, I think if you use the social media correctly, then they become a very engaging and a very useful tool for doing so.
Thank you very much, Artyom. Liss, we will now take questions for our panelists. If you have anything that you want to ask them, any comments you want to make, type those in using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And while you're doing that, I'm going to read out some questions that have come in already. And the first question is addressed to Artyom, so it's very appropriate. Although I would also like, after your answer, to pose the same question to the other of our panelists. The question is, and I'm just reading it out, do you agree with the approach in various Western countries to ban Russian news outlets? Are they not doing the same as the Russian authorities, banning messages that do not comply with their preferred narratives?
I think there's two answers in one. Two questions in one. The first question is whether I agree with the ban, and the second question is what are these media outlets doing? And I'll start, if you don't mind, with the second question. I think there's a massive difference between what outlets like Russia Today are doing, or RT as it's now known, and something like the BBC does. So the BBC or indeed any other respectable media organization sometimes makes mistakes. It's inevitable. But it sets out from the beginning, it sets out to uncover and tell the truth, right? Outlets like RT or outlets like Sputnik, their intention is different. They're driven by an intention to influence hearts and minds in a propaganda sort of manner and to promote propaganda narratives. So on the one hand, you have a media outlet which can make mistakes and does make mistakes, but corrects them. On the other hand, you have an outlet whose intention is to create a narrative which you can inhabit and then to push you in the direction that it wants you to be pushed. I think that is the key difference. The difference is one of intention. In terms of whether or not I agree with the idea that the governments are banning Russian media outlets, I don't think I do. I think it's a bit of a slippery slope. Having said that, I think I don't think it's a simple decision to make. I personally wouldn't ban them. I would put health warnings left, right, and center over them. If I was king, then what I would do is I would make a ruling that on RT's website, there would be a big thing plastered all across it saying this website is based on propaganda. But the website would continue to operate. Having said that, I'm not king, so it's not my decision.
It isn't your decision, but we all have a right to our opinions on the issue, and it's an incredibly interesting issue. I want to ask our other panelists, anyone who wants to address this, just show me. Rasťo, please go ahead.
Sure, I think it's a very good question, and I largely agree with Artyom. So basically what he explained was the difference between misinformation and disinformation. And I clearly believe that these outlets have been basically engaged for many, many years. And it has been really proven by a number of organizations, including my organization, that this was indeed the intention. And I would also really question whether these outlets have anything to do with media per se. At the same time, I would also exercise, some caution. I do agree that it's a slippery ground when it comes to real media outlets that actually spread similar type of messages. So we have to be careful, because this could always turn back against us. But we are in the war at the moment, and this does require some type of decisions like this one. And the last thing I will say, the central role that these sort of outlets have in spreading disinformation narratives, across the region, I think proves that these decisions. I personally support these decisions. So if I were a king, I would probably just go and ban these outlets for the situation that we face.
Rasťo, we're kings of different countries.
Indeed. Iryna, Anya, Viktor, Iryna, please.
Yeah. I would also like to agree with Rasťo, because I think that it's also the name, the thing how we name those, because when we call them media outlets, I think it's only about that they are registered as media outlets, but they actually do not follow any rules, any procedures of an independent media, because again, this is about the intention why they were formed. We speak about the Russia Today or Sputnik or some other channels. And I would also agree that this might be a decision of a country, because, recently, we're also doing a lot of volunteering job, and we buy protective equipment for our guys and volunteers who are on the front lines. And for instance, in Poland, you cannot order at Amazon.pl, and you cannot purchase anything without a Polish bank account. And for me, it was weird, but then it was explained that this is because of some Russian influence that they used to experience at some point. And so this is not the case. I think that every country, every state should examine those the level of propaganda and its influence on their society, on their nation, and then decide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iryna. Viktor, please.
Thank you so much. I want to support Iryna, Rasťo, and Artyom. And I want to make accent not only on TV channels, but also on Telegram channels. Like we saw that a couple of weeks ago, before the war, German authorities asked Pavel Durov to shut down some of terroristical Telegram channels. And they met and they have a conversation about that, because Durov said like he will never shut down any of Telegram channels, because Telegram is the platform for of freedom. But they decided they should do that because of the situation that these Telegram channels, they are spreading really ideas of terrorism and other stuff. So we see the situation not only in TV, but also in Telegram, in Viber, that if there is something wrong, something really put the conflict between people, spread hatred and other stuff. So the countries, like Iryna says, they can make their own decisions. And also we saw it, the president with even Telegram channels, not only TV and other stuff. So I completely agree with this point of view. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Viktor. And I want to ask if Anya has a comment on this, but then connect this to another question that has come in, which is very closely related, although in one sense turned upside down. The question is, and again, I'm just reading it out, while the Russian Federation is spreading disinformation about the war, also the Ukrainian side is using propaganda as part of its war effort. Is international media, not Ukrainian media at this point, too uncritical in repeating what is reported by Ukrainian institutions? Anya, if you're with us first, I wonder if you want to comment on that question and as well as the first one.
Thank you, Magnus. These are unprecedented times and they call for unprecedented actions. I think what we have learned in these now 36 days of war is that we have to be very creative and we have to learn from each other and we have to share in those lessons. Perhaps I will use this as one of my final remarks, is that we have to do what it takes to help Ukraine and the free democratic world lead and win in this war that is taking place on many fronts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anya. Who else would like to address that issue? Artyom, you did mention it already, so let's please go on with that. Please go ahead, Artyom.
I want to pick up on what Anya said, and I want to pick up by saying that let's think about who the word "we" that she used refers to. So if we are the civil society, if we are the activists, if we are the governments, then absolutely 100%. However, if we refers to the media community, if we refers to the journalists, then you know what, I was talking to a very senior Ukrainian media manager the other day, and he said to me, he said, I'd told my journalists that we are at war, which we are, and we are just as much part of the Ukrainian army as the people who are, you know, fighting with their Kalashnikovs or their anti-tank missiles or whatever. I think with that, I think saying to the journalists, you are part of the Ukrainian army is understandable in these, as Anya says, difficult times. They are extraordinary times and perhaps extraordinary measures are easy to understand. But I have a little bit of a concern about the blurring of this line between journalism, which is there to hold the elites to account, and the civil society and the activism. I know it's very easy for me to say, you know, sitting here thousands of miles away from conflict, and I know that it may sound very insensitive, and I do apologize to people who find what I'm saying insensitive and horrible. I don't mean it as something that's offensive, but what I do want to say is that longer term, perhaps this is something that merits thinking about.
Good point. Thank you very much. Rasťo.
I completely agree. And I would just add that I also completely understand the Ukrainian side. It's a war, and I think this is I think completely understandable from my position. At the same time, I've noticed that some international media are becoming more careful about using the information that they are being provided by the Ukrainian side, at least the media that I'm following. So I think they already try to make an extra effort, or at least always stress that we could not independently verify this information. So I think this comes almost sort of understandable, you know, that this is war reporting, and you know, I think we should just clearly understand that you know, it's both sides, you know, that will try to frame the narrative. One side has been doing this notoriously, so you never hear anything that is even close to truth, and of course the side that is defending itself here, I think again it's also happening at the same time. And one last thing where I completely agree with Artyom, I think long term, you know, it's really about, I mean, the best way how to defend or how to actually react to disinformation is really by building trust. You know, we really, and that's where we really need good professional journalists, you know, who are actually able to call a spade, you know. And so there, I think we really need to rely on their professional judgment and their ability to make that distinction between, where it's really important to already, call people in case they are really lying, So I think on that sense, I think I would just finish this response.
Thank you very much, Rasťo. Just asking, Viktor, Iryna, do you want to comment on this?
I can just add, two positions in one person, because of course, as a Ukrainian, I support this positive propaganda, which is designed by the Ukrainian government. But on the other hand, yes, as a professional civil society activist, of course, I do understand the need to fact check all the information that the media outlets receive from both sides. And I think that now it is, of course, it is difficult for the journalists, but we also have the same situation, for instance, with the human rights defenders groups. When they have to, Ukrainian HRDs have to provide help to both sides.
Thank you very much, Iryna. And for me, it just reminds me, having worked with Ukraine for many years, the Ukrainian state until February 24th, unlike the Russian state, was never unitary. It was never one voice, one message, right? Obviously, that situation has changed. Viktor, do you want to cut in on this?
Yeah, a little bit. Thank you. And that's really, thank you, Magnus, for this word, because I just want to add that right now we have the situation where inside of Ukraine, we have really one voice from the governmental officials, from civil society, from all of instruments, of media instruments, of TV, internet, Telegram channels, Facebook, etc. And also, I just wanted to add that it's not only about the news, it's also about some stories about some people, of their goodness, of their, about braveness, about these great things that are Ukrainian people doing to each other, to help each other, to save lives and other stuff. So, and this is not a propaganda, and this is not a news, but this is the real stories about real people who are in trouble and who are helping to each other, and about real society. And this is the power of Ukrainian people in this situation, and that's why we want to tell it to people all over the world and ask them to unite, because it's really important, this situation, because Putin began war not only against Ukraine but against all civilized world, civilized world. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Viktor, and thank you all for your input on this issue. We're running short of time. I want to end up with a question that's been posed to Rasťo, which broadens up the issue, and I'm reading it out again. It was mentioned that other governments are using the war in Ukraine to spread disinformation that serves their own political purposes. Is that something that you've seen, and what impact may this have on democracy in the region?
Do you want me to start, perhaps?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, actually, I really think that it was very interesting to follow what actually happened after after this aggression started, because interestingly, and now I speak mainly for my country, for Slovakia, even the day before, the members of the opposition here and also the disinformation scene, they basically were saying that there will be no war, and this is all just invented by America, and so it took them at least 2 or 3 days to recover, so to say, and start basically flooding the information space again with some kind of narratives, and these were rather defensive narratives, I should say. I mean, the type of the truth is somewhere in the middle. Okay, there is aggression, but then what about US bombing Yugoslavia or something? So yeah, I think it was really interesting, and I don't really believe that, at least from my perspective, that this is really in their advantage. I think the mask has gone down, and now I think the whole world basically sees what this Kremlin regime can do. So it's really it's not that this would really benefit any sort of government, at least from my perspective, at least not in a short term. There will be problems, and I think our speakers here in the panel already mentioned those. I think each there will be humanitarian, or there has been already humanitarian situation. There are so many refugees, as mentioned by Iryna. It's not only Poland, but I'm expecting that it will be soon also here in Slovakia, that they will become, unfortunately, also the victims of disinformation. So we should get ready for this, because of course now we live in this sort of solidarity mood, but that will unfortunately change, with weeks to come.
Thank you very much, Rasťo. I would love to continue this discussion for an awfully long time. There are a lot of things that we can talk about, but we have come to the end of our time together. So I want to thank all our panelists. I want to thank all of you for participating. I want to again thank USAID for supporting this event, and my IFES colleagues for the preparation and the management of this discussion. So the next installment in this discussion series will be held on April the 28th, and I hope to see you all in that discussion. Until then, stay safe.